Found it. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm glad people showed up after lunch. About 5 minutes ago, this room was looking very sad and depressing. So my talk is why another roll-up, and I think a lot of you probably have intuited what this is going to be about already. My name is James. I work on something called Signet. Signet is another roll-up, and I'm going to tell you why another roll-up. I've been involved in crypto for going on 12 years now. And so I've seen a lot of trends in the space. I've seen a lot of things come and go. And roll-ups are one of the things that has come and stuck around. So we're going to talk about it a little more. So first, we're going to need to go 45 minutes in-depth history of roll-ups, where they came from, how they started, why they're called roll-ups. And I only have a 20 minutes left in my talk, so we're actually not going to make it to the real material at all. Here's your quick reading list. You want to read Roll_Up by Barry Whitehat. This is Ethereum Foundation research from 2018-2019. This is the origin of the name Rollup, the first time it was used on a system that someone actually built. Read Truebit. Truebit's the ones that invented the fault game that is used by optimistic rollups these days. Everyone kind of built on their work, even though Truebit somewhat exploded and went nowhere and then launched a token 3 years later and did nothing. And read Plasma. Plasma is the single most influential thing for modern rollups. If you don't understand plasmas and how they were put together, you won't understand why anyone made any design decision in any modern rollup. And to give you more, here's the spicy reading list. About 2-3 years ago, there were a bunch of debates on Twitter, a bunch of blog posts written back and forth from Kelvin at Optimism, from John Charb, which were basically all definitional arguments about what a rollup is. And you're going to want to read Mastercoin and Counterparty. These were Bitcoin sovereign rollups from 2014, 2015, way before we called anything a rollup, way before we made up the term. But by any reasonable definition of a rollup, these are the first rollups. These are the first things that are embedding extra state attached to a blockchain using that blockchain for DA. Read forkgen.tech. This actually doesn't exist anymore. This was a website where you could just fill out a little form and get a Bitcoin fork. So this is the reason there were like 300 Bitcoin clones back in 2015, 2016, is because you could actually just go to a website, pay 0.1 BTC, which was not very much money at the time. That was like $100 or less. And you could just have a blockchain, binary, everything, mining pool, whatever, set up for you in about 10 minutes. And as a result, we had all of these like coins that nobody remembers or thinks about anymore. This entire family of Bitcoin clones, like Grossel Coin, Raven Coin, Aurora Coin. That one was dropped to the residents of Iceland, by the way, one of the first significant airdrops back in 2014. And if you want to understand rollups, you have to read my blog. My blog is essentially trying to take all those definitional debates and get someone to actually engage with what is a rollup by swearing a lot and trying to be very wrong very loudly. It unfortunately didn't work, but it does still have what I think is the best definition of a rollup in it. So, like, take a quick photo of the reading list, go, like, Google all these things afterwards. I'm actually not going to explain them. Okay. So how are all of these things relevant today? Like, why am I bringing up all of this reading? Why am I trying to get you to learn history? No one wants to learn history, I think. So let's talk about where we are. Because the reason to understand the past is to understand why we are where we are. If you understand where we've been, where we are, you're going to get a good sense of where we're going. So I saw Bartek in the back. I actually cited L2Beat for quite a bit of, like this section of the talk. We have a bunch of rollups. We got like a bunch of them. I think that says 58 rollups, 23 under review, and 73 things that L2Beat doesn't think are rollups. So we've got great stuff like Snacks Chain and Roar, Dairy L3 on Arbitrum 1. Has anyone ever heard of or used any of these things? Any hands? No? No, okay. So we've got about 50 rollups that nobody uses or thinks about or cares about, right? This is the state of thing. 33 of these 50 rollups are based on the OP stack or Optimism's work somehow. 20 of those secure more than my lunch costs every year. The other 13 are, I mean, they have TVL measured in the hundreds or thousands of dollars. Like we have these chains that do nothing, and we have a dozen of them. So rollups are kind of like shovelware at this point. Most of these exist just to VC fund a company, to get a token out the door, and to say you're doing something. This is all kind of crap. Like most rollups are junk. They're just being shoveled out. Hopefully you use it. Maybe you buy their token. But we have 58 of them, right? We're doing a lot of scaling of the L1. We've scaled the L1 58 times. It's great. Well, unfortunately, we have like 3.5. Like I said, most of these are built on the OP stack. Some of them are built on Arbitrum's code base. Some of them are built on ZK Sync. Some of them are bespoke, like the Starkware stuff or the Tycho-based rollup stuff. Let's take like the three main stacks and run a quick comparison. Here's your main points of rollup design. How is it sequenced? How do you bridge into the rollup? What's the internal VM? How do you bridge out? And starting from the top, ZK Sync uses this run-ahead central signer. So some guy signs the sequence and then submits it to Ethereum after it's sequenced. Arbitrum uses a run-ahead central signer where some guy signs the sequence, submits it to Ethereum after it's sequenced. Opstack uses a run-ahead central signer where some guy signs the sequence, submits it to Ethereum after it's sequenced. So when bridging in, you make a transaction on Ethereum. The sequencer is forced to include that and can include it before they are forced to. In Arbitrum, you make a transaction on Ethereum. The sequencer must include that, can include it before they're forced to. And on Opstack, like you probably get where this is going, right? Like the only differentiation between the three major stacks is that ZK Sync uses a ZK proof, and the others use fault proofs. Optimism Arbitrum used to be differentiated on how their fault proof works. There was this thing called the OVM for a while. They never actually got the fault proof working on it, and it was a bad design from the get-go, so Optimism eventually copied Arbitrum's homework and went to the recursive TrueBit style fault game. And so you have these three major rollup stacks that are securing I don't know how much money, or have I don't know how much TVL. And they're all basically, from a design perspective, exactly the same thing. With the one exception of ZK Sync has ZK proofs. The design space is just stagnant. Nobody does anything new here. Rollups are stagnant. So why another rollup? Because they're stagnant. Because they're shovelware. You can take the design space, you can do new things with it. We don't have to just be copying the big stacks. They're all the same. We've explored this tiny little portion of the design space. So I'm going to go through real quick and talk about just the four big design points. What else could you do? This is how sequencing works. This is from the Optimism spec. If it looks as clear as mud, it's because it is. There's really a super complex thing that they do to enable this run-ahead sequencing. You have to have your transactions in blocks that get put in data batches, and then those blocks could span different batches, and that's why you have this A1, B0 thing. And so you can just make it a lot simpler than that with a based rollup like Tycho does. You could also look at federated sequencing, where it's not just optimism signing blocks, where you have multiple people doing it. You could have open sequencing, where anyone could sign a block and submit data to Ethereum. There's based sequencing. You can also do things here with fork choice rule changes. We wrote a whole blog post on this. A rollup can actually like change its sequence retroactively based on what the host chain does, based on what Ethereum does. Nobody has really explored this, but you could have something that is sequenced by an outside sequencer and then changed by Ethereum after the fact. And you can actually reevaluate the whole rollup based on that. And so if this sounds like a little abstract, it's because no one has built anything concrete here. We've built exactly one sequencer. We've built a central signer that says what the order of transactions is. We have never experimented in this space. For bridging in, they all work exactly the same way. The sequencer must include your transaction from Ethereum, and they do it after a time lag. If you're willing to change how the sequencer works, you could remove that time lag. The time lag is there because the sequencer runs ahead of Ethereum. If the sequencer is not running ahead, you could remove the time lag. So there's already one big improvement to be made here if you are willing to change the sequencing model, which no one is because 50 rollups are just kind of crapware that people shoveled out to launch a token. This one, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on because I actually agree with using the EVM. You should be EVM compatible because it has the most tooling available. But there are still things that we should be exploring that we aren't. NIST-compatible curves for transactions are done in precompiles on Base and Optimism and other places. They should be first-class citizens. Arbitrum is actually experimenting with WASM embedded in the EVM so that you could switch execution context from EVM to WASM and back. It's really interesting and cool. But there's not as much experimentation as there should be. Everyone mostly just makes an EVM with a couple extra precompiles. And for bridging out, this is really one where I think it's we're kind of paying for Plasma's sins here. We went into rollups coming out of Plasma Group, coming out of all these Plasma designs, which had this thing called the mass exit problem, where if there's an issue, everyone wants to exit the Plasma at once, everyone has to submit these proofs and go back to Ethereum, and et cetera, et cetera. And so rollups were designed from the ground up with proof systems as seen as critical to their functioning because they came out of plasmas. Proof systems are not critical to a rollup's functioning because a rollup is not a plasma. And so there's this unexplored space of what if we just don't have a proof? We call that a sovereign rollup. What if we use something other than optimism has control over the bridge? You could federate it. You could use restaking or something. I don't care. Signet, which I work on, uses conditional transactions, where you're not proving the state of the rollup. You're making a conditional movement on the rollup if certain conditions are met on the host. This allows you to do things like trade across chains with 0 block latency. So rather than using a proof to bridge funds out, you're instead trading with someone who already has funds outside the system. There is a huge design space of re-examining whether a rollup needs proofs at all and why we built proofs the way we have. That, is unexplored because we have exactly 2 systems that were built already and nobody launching rollups wants to innovate. So the big takeaway of this talk is that rollups as a design space is way bigger, more complex than you think. There's a huge amount of unexplored rollup choices, things we could be building that we aren't. Some of those things are going to be useful. Some of them are going to be useful in ways that are impossible for the current systems to achieve. Current systems cannot achieve 0 block latency on bridging. They can't achieve 0 block trades between chains, without drastically altering the sequencing model, the VM, the bridging models, without making completely different fundamental design choices and rebuilding from the ground up. So we've talked about like rollups are shovelware. Most of the people launching rollups don't understand how they work, why they were designed the way they do, or why they're even launching one in the first place. They're just trying to get something out the door so they can justify their funding round and maybe get liquidity on, greater fools. Rollups are stagnant. We have 3 designs, which are really one design with a slight variation on proving system. And rollups are just kind of sad. If I go look at L2Beat, like, it doesn't make me happy. I don't think any of those are particularly interesting. We're not launching good work here. And rollups could be creative, right? We should be exploring the design space. We should be building things that are new and interesting, and rollups can be unique. We don't need 30 optimisms. I don't think there's any use for 30 optimisms. I think there's probably not much of a use for 3 of them. And rollups can be joyful. Like, we can have fun doing this. We can go build things like Fuel V1. We can go build things like all of the farming or the party stuff from 2021. We can do something besides launching a centralized corporate chain. And that's my talk. I'm James. I got a lot of opinions. I have about 5 minutes left for questions. I see in the back over there. Oh, it looks like there's a microphone coming towards you.
Thank you, James. The most obvious question from me, by the way, I'm Bartek, I'm a founder of L2Beat. What L2Beat can do better to make you happy? I want you to be happy when you go to L2Beat. But more seriously, most of these rollups that you showed that no one seems to be caring about are essentially launched by rollup as a service providers that actually told everyone, hey, with one click of a button, you can launch a rollup. Do I read all this as a critique of their fundamental existence? What about Celestia's promise of build whatever you want? We're gonna have 10,000s of rollups, each doing this little thing. What's your take on generally RAS providers and the ability to launch a rollup with just one click of a button?
Yeah. So I'm old enough to remember 2017, 2018, and 2013, 2014. And one big thing that happened back then was, ICOs and token sales and an entire industry formed around those. There wasn't just token sales. You didn't just go launch a token and get $30 million. You paid service providers to do it for you. The service providers would write the contracts, audit the contracts, run the front end, run KYC if you wanted that. There was an entire ecosystem of token sale as a service providers that grew up because there was money to be made. And so for Rollup as a service providers, that's a natural consequence of money being made by launching rollups. People want to launch a rollup to make money. Someone provides that as a service. I don't think it's a business that I would want to be in personally, but it is a natural consequence of the amount of money that flows towards these things.
Someone else?
Any other questions?
Maybe I can ask a question.
Please.
I like the idea of no bridging out. What does it mean?
So I brought up Counterparty a couple times in the talk and Mastercoin. For both of those, they were essentially you would burn Bitcoin to get tokens on the rollup. So Counterparty, you could actually purchase XCP with Bitcoin and your Bitcoin would be burned. Side note, Mastercoin you might know better as Omni, which was the home of Tether. So Tether was homed on this Bitcoin rollup for a decade before they finally went fully multi-chain. I don't know if burning Ether is like a good business strategy, or burning your assets on the host to mint them on the rollup is a great idea, but it is like a part of the design space that nobody is exploring. You can also do things where you can get rid of the proof, but still have some fallback mechanism on the host for getting those assets, right? So for years and years, Optimism was essentially a 2 of 2 multisig for moving assets on Ethereum, right? The company had one key, and the company also had a key that could veto changes. This was considered production ready and good enough for billions of dollars for a long time. I think you could have a bit more of a secure setup than that. But the point being, like, the proof is a bolted-on system after the fact. If you can achieve bridging back to the host, if you can achieve bridging back to Ethereum without the proof, you don't need the proof at all. Users want to bridge back. They don't care about the proof. The way this is done right now is that the companies have multisigs, which control upgrading the proof system. So those multisigs are also a root of trust for the system, and in control of funds on mainnet. I don't think that's actually... I think that that's actually a fine long-term setup, and we see that in most major assets. USDC, WBTC, all work that way. There is a multisig as root of trust, and that's probably okay. Yeah.
I have a question as a person with some background in one of these boring rollups that just copied OP stack. And the question is, when you think about users using your rollup, and especially when you think about developers developing on your rollup, what's your opinion? How far can you stray away from, let's say, standard tech? How far can you go so the users can actually come and use the MetaMasks and Uniswaps that they used to, and the developers can come and use the things that they also used to develop?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. When you're designing an ecosystem like this, maintaining tooling compatibility is so important. You see this with like the Starkware with Cairo. It's so much harder to build on Cairo than it is to build on Optimism or something similar, or on Arbitrum. What I like to see is things that extend the EVM rather than modify the EVM. Rollups also always have to make certain EVM modifications just because they run in a different environment. So for example, what does the prev randao opcode do in various different rollup environments? It can't work the way it works on mainnet, so what does it do? But maintaining compatibility with wallets, with tooling, and strictly extending that functionality is the most important thing. This means that most of your extensions should be available over common standards like EIP 712, not 721. I hate that those are named so similar. 712, the structured data signature standard. If you're not exposing new functionality over existing standards, then probably people aren't going to use your new functionality at all. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but it is my ramble for right now.
More questions?